From a director who walked out of his own premiere to Sean Connery's most expensive paycheck for the least amount of work, the troubled production of this sci-fi sequel spawned more bizarre stories than any movie should. Between hyperinflation disasters, legally blind sword fights, and resurrection scenes that interrupted Shakespeare performances, this notorious sequel created chaos both on and off screen. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Highlander II. The Quickening. Fact 1. Sean Connery's $1 million per day deal. When Sean Connery agreed to return as Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez in Highlander II, The Quickening, he negotiated what became one of the most lucrative short-term deals in movie history at that time. The legendary actor, fresh off his James Bond fame and recent success in films like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, commanded a staggering $3 million for what amounted to just 6 to 10 days of actual filming work. To put this extraordinary paycheck into perspective, Connery was earning approximately $300,000 to $500,000 per day, making this one of the highest per-day salaries ever recorded in Hollywood during the early 1990s. The producers were so desperate to bring back the beloved character of Ramirez, despite the fact that he had been killed off in the original Highlander film, that they were willing to pay this astronomical sum to secure Connery's participation. The irony of this massive payday becomes even more apparent when you consider that Ramirez had died in the first film, requiring the writers to create an entirely new magical resurrection subplot just to justify bringing Connery back. According to screenwriter Brian Clemens, having Sean Connery's character return was described as a non-negotiable mandate from the producers, making his hefty salary demand essentially unavoidable if they wanted to move forward with the sequel. Christopher Lambert, who played the lead role of Connor MacLeod throughout the entire grueling production in Argentina, had reportedly become close friends with Connery during the filming of the original movie, and specifically insisted that Ramirez be written back into the story. This friendship ultimately cost the production millions, but the producers felt Connery's star power was essential for the film's commercial success, making his brief but expensive appearance a calculated gamble that they hoped would pay off at the box office. Fact 2. Christopher Lambert's legally blind sword fighting. Christopher Lambert suffers from severe myopia, which means he is legally blind without his corrective glasses and cannot see anything clearly beyond a few feet. What makes this medical condition particularly remarkable is that Lambert also cannot wear contact lenses, leaving him essentially blind during most of his film career whenever he had to remove his glasses for action scene. During the filming of Highlander II, this visual impairment created extraordinarily dangerous situations, especially during the elaborate sword-fighting sequences that were central to the movie's action. Before each scene, Lambert would carefully walk around the set while wearing his glasses, memorizing the layout of furniture, props, and obstacles, so he wouldn't crash into them once filming began. And he had to remove his eyewear. The sword-fighting scenes became particularly treacherous because Lambert insisted on using real metal swords rather than safer rubber or plastic alternatives, despite being unable to see his opponent's movements clearly. This dangerous combination of authentic weapons and severely limited vision led to multiple injuries throughout the production. During his very first sword-fighting scene in the movie, Lambert accidentally cut his finger to the bone when he couldn't see an incoming blade swing from his co-star. Lambert's co-star Michael Ironside also fell victim to these hazardous conditions when Lambert accidentally chipped one of Ironside's teeth during a fight scene, demonstrating just how dangerous it was for everyone involved when the lead actor couldn't properly see what he was doing. According to the St. Petersburg Times, both actors acknowledged that precision thrusts and parries became virtually impossible when Lambert was wielding a 22-pound broadsword while essentially blind. Despite these obvious safety concerns, Lambert continued to perform his own stunts throughout the production, relying on muscle memory, careful choreography, and sheer determination to complete the physically demanding action sequences that the Highlander franchise was known for. Fact 3. Argentina's economic collapse destroyed production. The producers of Highlander II chose to film in Argentina during 1990 because they believed the favorable exchange rate would save them approximately $8 to $10 million compared to shooting in the United States, Europe. What seemed like a smart financial decision quickly turned into a complete disaster when Argentina's economy crashed while the cameras were rolling, creating one of the most chaotic film productions in movie history. During the spring of 1990, Argentina was experiencing its worst hyperinflation crisis ever recorded, with prices rising so rapidly that the cost of basic goods and services would change multiple times within a single day. The film's budget, which had been carefully calculated at $30 million, began spiraling out of control as everything from equipment rentals to hotel rooms became exponentially more expensive with each passing week. The economic chaos became so severe that the film's completion bond company, which exists to protect investors when productions go over budget, was forced to step in and seize complete control of the movie. These financial overseers removed director Russell Mulcahy from his position and took over both the creative direction and the final editing process, fundamentally changing the story and visual effects to cut costs and finish the movie as quickly as possible. According to reports from the time, the value of the American dollar was fluctuating so wildly against the Argentine peso that producers literally had no way to predict what their daily expenses would be from one morning to the next. The longer the production continued, the more technicians had to be flown in from the United States at enormous expense, because local equipment was either unavailable or unsafe to use. This financial nightmare was later documented in a making-of documentary called Highlander II, Seduced by Argentina, which detailed how the country's economic collapse turned what should have been a straightforward sequel into one of the most troubled productions in Hollywood history. Fact 4. The director walked out after 15 minutes. Russell Mulcahy's dramatic exit from his own movie's world premiere remains one of the most embarrassing moments in Hollywood history, demonstrating just how completely the completion bond company had destroyed his original vision for Highlander II. When Mulcahy sat down in the theater to watch the finished film for the first time alongside critics, distributors, and other industry professionals, he had no idea how drastically his work had been altered during the final editing process. The director had been completely locked out of post-production after the bond company seized control of the movie due to the spiraling costs caused by Argentina's economic crisis. This meant that Mulcahy was seeing the theatrical version of his own film at the same time as everyone else in the audience, with no advance warning about the changes that had been made to his footage. According to multiple reports from people who attended the premiere, Mulcahy became visibly agitated as he watched the opening scenes, which had been heavily rearranged and re-edited without his input. The Bond company had not only changed the sequence of events, but had also removed key scenes that Mulcahy felt were essential to the story's coherence and emotional impact. After enduring exactly 15 minutes of watching his work butchered beyond recognition, Mulcahy stood up from his seat and walked out of the theater in full view of the assembled crowd, making his disgust with the final product unmistakably clear to everyone present. This public display of directorial rejection was so unusual and shocking that it became part of the movie's legend, overshadowing even the film's terrible reviews in entertainment industry gossip. The humiliation was so complete that Mulcahy later attempted to have his directing credit changed to the pseudonym Alan Smithy, which directors traditionally use when they want to disown a project, but his contract prevented him from making this change without facing legal consequences from the producers. Fact 5. Lambert cut his finger to the bone. Christopher Lambert's commitment to authenticity during the filming of Highlander II led to a gruesome injury that perfectly demonstrated the dangerous combination of his visual impairment and his insistence on using real weapons. Despite being legally blind without his glasses and unable to wear contact lenses, Lambert absolutely refused to use the safer rubber or plastic prop swords that the stunt coordinators recommended for the fight scenes. Lambert's decision to work with genuine metal blades, while essentially unable to see, created an incredibly hazardous situation that worried everyone on set. But the actor remained determined to maintain the realistic feel of the sword-fighting sequences that had made the original Highlander so memorable. The production team tried to convince him to at least consider using fake weapons during the more complex choreographed battles, but Lambert felt that only real swords would give him the proper weight and balance needed to perform convincingly. During his very first sword-fighting scene in the movie, Lambert's worst fears were realized when he completely failed to see an incoming blade swing from his scene partner. The sharp edge of the real sword sliced deep into Lambert's finger, cutting all the way down to the bone and causing significant bleeding that immediately halted production, while medical personnel rushed to treat the wound. This injury was particularly shocking because it happened so early in the filming process, demonstrating that Lambert's visual limitations combined with authentic weapons created an ongoing safety hazard that would plague the entire production. The accident served as a stark reminder of just how dangerous it was for someone with severe myopia to engage in realistic combat scenes, especially when wielding heavy medieval weapons that could cause serious harm with even the slightest miscalculation. Despite the severity of this injury and the obvious risks it highlighted, Lambert continued to insist on using real swords throughout the rest of the filming, leading to additional accidents and injuries for both himself and his co-stars. Fact 6. Michael Ironside dislocated his jaw. Michael Ironside, who played the villainous General Katana in Highlander II, became another casualty of the film's increasingly dangerous production when he suffered a serious jaw injury during one of the movie's most elaborate action sequences. The dome fight scene, which was supposed to showcase the futuristic setting and advanced special effects that the larger budget had made possible, instead became the site of yet another painful accident that highlighted just how hazardous the entire filming process had become. Ironside's jaw dislocation occurred during a particularly intense moment of choreographed combat, where the veteran actor was performing his own stunts alongside Christopher Lambert in what was meant to be one of the film's climactic battle sequences. The injury was severe enough to require immediate medical attention and caused significant delays in the shooting schedule, as Ironside needed time to recover before he could continue with his demanding physical performance as the primary antagonist. This accident was especially frustrating for Ironside, who had taken the role partly because he had never played a barbarian swordsman before and was excited about the opportunity to explore this type of character. The experienced character actor, known for his intense performances in films like Total Recall and Top Gun, had been looking forward to the physical challenges that came with wielding medieval weapons and engaging in elaborate fight choreography. The jaw injury added to the growing list of on-set accidents that were making the Argentina production increasingly notorious within the film industry, demonstrating that even seasoned professional actors were not immune to the dangerous conditions that had developed due to the combination of real weapons, challenging stunts, and the general chaos caused by the country's economic crisis. Ironside later recovered fully from the injury and was able to complete his role, though the accident served as another reminder of how the production's commitment to authenticity was creating genuine safety hazards for everyone involved. Fact 7. Ramirez interrupts a real Hamlet performance. One of the most surreal moments in Highlander II occurs when Sean Connery's character Ramirez is magically resurrected in the middle of a live theatrical performance of William Shakespeare's Hamlet, creating a bizarre collision between high culture and science fiction that perfectly captured the movie's chaotic tone. The filmmakers decided to shoot this resurrection scene during an actual stage production in Glencoe, Scotland, using real actors who were performing the famous graveyard scene where Hamlet contemplates the skull of Yorick. According to the script, Ramirez was supposed to materialize on stage just as the actor playing Hamlet was delivering the iconic line about poor Yorick, creating a moment of magical realism that would establish the otherworldly nature of the immortal's return from death. However, the filming process proved far more complicated than anticipated because the stage actors had not been fully prepared for how disruptive the movie production would be to their performance. When Sean Connery suddenly appeared on stage in full costume with his sword, the actor playing Hamlet became genuinely confused and frustrated by the interruption. Instead of smoothly continuing with the scripted dialogue that would have blended the theatrical performance with the movie scene, the Hamlet actor broke character completely and turned to Connery with visible annoyance, demanding to know what his game was and calling him a particularly colorful, profane name. This unscripted outburst created an unexpectedly comedic moment that the filmmakers decided to keep in the final cut, with Ramirez responding in character by asking what the unfamiliar curse word meant. The scene became even more absurd when Connery's character began using the newly learned profanity throughout the rest of his dialogue, despite not understanding its meaning. The confused audience watching the actual Hamlet performance can be seen in the background of the movie, apparently unsure whether this strange interruption was part of the play or some kind of elaborate theatrical experiment. Fact 8. The alien origin wasn't executive meddling. For decades, angry fans of the original Highlander have blamed studio executives and the completion Bond company for the most controversial aspect of Highlander II: the revelation that immortals were actually aliens from a distant planet called Zeist. This widespread belief suggests that money-hungry producers forced the writers to completely change the mythology of the series, transforming mystical warriors into science fiction refugees to make the story more commercially appealing to mainstream audiences. However, This popular explanation for the movie's narrative problems is completely incorrect, as the alien origin story was actually present in the very first draft of the screenplay, written by British television veteran Brian Clemens. The experienced writer, who was best known for creating shows like The Avengers and The Professionals, came up with the Zeist concept as his solution to the seemingly impossible task of creating a sequel to a movie that had definitively ended the story of Connor MacLeod. Clemens has publicly stated that he hated working on the Highlander II screenplay because the producers gave him the non-negotiable requirement that Sean Connery's character had to return despite the fact that Ramirez had been killed in the first film. The writer described the experience as torturous because he was trying to create a follow-up to a movie that had such a closed and final ending, leaving him with very few options for continuing the story. The confusion about who was responsible for the alien subplot likely arose because later versions of the movie, including the Renegade cut released in 1995, removed all references to Planet Zeist in response to the intense fan backlash. This editing choice made it appear as though the alien elements had been studio additions that were later corrected, when in reality the opposite was true, and the original creative vision had included the controversial science fiction elements from the very beginning. Fact 9. John C. McInley tried to sound like Orson Welles. John C. McInley, who played the corporate villain David Blake in Highlander II, made a peculiar artistic choice that he would later regret by deliberately altering his natural speaking voice to imitate the legendary filmmaker and actor Orson Welles. McInley, who would later become famous for his fast-talking, high-energy performance as Dr. Perry Cox on the television series Scrubs, decided that his character needed a deep, authoritative voice that would convey the menacing power of a corrupt corporate executive. Throughout the entire filming process, McInley consciously lowered his voice as much as possible, trying to capture the distinctive bass tones and deliberate pacing that made Orson Welles such an iconic presence in classic films like Citizen Kane and The Third Man. The actor believed that this vocal transformation would give his character more gravitas and make him seem like a more intimidating antagonist who could hold his own against the immortal warriors and alien generals that populated the movie's bizarre science fiction plot. However, McInley's vocal experiment created an unnatural and forced delivery that made his dialogue sound stiff and awkward, rather than commanding and powerful. The artificially deepened voice clashed with his natural speaking patterns and made it difficult for him to deliver his lines with the kind of smooth confidence that the role required, resulting in a performance that felt uncomfortable and unconvincing. Years after the movie was released, McInley publicly acknowledged that his Orson Welles impression was a terrible mistake that had hurt his performance rather than enhancing it. The actor admitted that the vocal affectation had been a bad creative decision that distracted from his ability to bring depth and authenticity to the character, demonstrating how even well-intentioned artistic choices can backfire when they fight against an actor's natural instincts and abilities, rather than building upon them. Fact 10. 3 different movies exist. Highlander II holds the unusual distinction of existing in 3 dramatically different versions that are so unlike each other, they might as well be completely separate movies, each telling the story in fundamentally different ways, with altered plots, visual effects, and even contradictory explanations for the basic mythology of the series. This unprecedented situation arose from the chaotic production history and the various attempts by different parties to salvage what they considered to be a fundamentally flawed film. The original theatrical cut, released in 1991, was assembled by the Completion Bond Company after they seized control from director Russell Mulcahy, resulting in a 91-minute version that rearranged scenes, removed key footage, and added new material to create what they believed would be the most commercially viable product. This version included the controversial alien origin story and featured numerous continuity errors caused by the haphazard editing process. In 1995, Mulcahy was finally able to release his preferred version called the Renegade Cut, which restored nearly 20 minutes of previously unseen footage and completely eliminated all references to Planet Zeist, instead suggesting that the Immortals came from Earth's distant past rather than outer space. This version restructured the entire narrative flow, moved scenes back to their intended positions, and created a fundamentally different story that contradicted many of the plot points established in the theatrical release. The third incarnation appeared in 2004 as the special edition, which kept most of the Renegade Cut's story structure but replaced many of the visual effects with new computer-generated imagery, changed the color of the protective shield from red to blue, and added additional voiceover work by Christopher Lambert. Each version features different endings, altered character motivations, and incompatible explanations for the Immortals' origins, making it impossible for fans to agree on which version represents the true story of Connor MacLeod's adventures in the future. Fact 11. A Bond crew created the chaos. Despite the ultimately disastrous results, Highlander II actually boasted an impressive production pedigree filled with experienced British crew members who had worked on some of the most successful action films in cinema history, particularly the James Bond franchise. The producers assembled what they believed would be a dream team of technical experts who had proven their abilities on high-profile international productions, hoping that their expertise would elevate the sequel far above the modest budget constraints of the original film. Among the most notable crew members was Chris Corbould, who served as the special effects coordinator and brought with him extensive experience from working on multiple Bond films where he had mastered the art of creating spectacular practical effects and elaborate stunt sequences. Corbould was part of a larger contingent of British technicians who had built their reputations working on the kind of globe-trotting adventure films that the producers hoped Highlander II would emulate in terms of scope and visual spectacle. The crew also included Second Unit Director Arthur Wooster, along with visual effects supervisor John Richardson, both of whom had significant experience working on major studio productions that required complex coordination between multiple departments and international filming locations. These seasoned professionals were accustomed to managing large-scale productions with substantial budgets and sophisticated technical requirements, making them seem like ideal choices for a sequel that was intended to be much more ambitious than its predecessor. However, the irony of this distinguished production team is that their considerable expertise and proven track record could not overcome the fundamental problems created by the economic chaos in Argentina and the creative interference from the Completion Bond Company. Even with all their professional experience and technical knowledge, these accomplished crew members found themselves powerless to prevent the production from spiraling into one of the most troubled and ultimately unsuccessful sequels in film history, demonstrating that talent alone cannot always overcome impossible circumstances. Fact 12. The Kurgan was almost in it. The original screenplay for Highlander II included a fascinating subplot that would have brought back Clancy Brown's terrifying villain, the Kurgan, from the first film, creating a direct connection between the sequel and the memorable antagonist who had made such a powerful impression on audiences in the original movie. According to the early script drafts, the Kurgan was going to be revealed as one of General Katana's henchmen, who had been specifically sent to Earth with the mission of preventing Connor MacLeod and Ramirez from successfully completing their quest and claiming the prize. This storyline would have explained the Kurgan's presence in the first film as part of a larger conspiracy orchestrated by Katana, with the brutal warrior serving as an advance agent whose job was to eliminate MacLeod before he could become powerful enough to threaten the evil general's rule on planet Zeist. The script also indicated that the Kurgan's eventual death at MacLeod's hands was part of what motivated Katana to personally travel to Earth and confront the Highlander directly, providing a clear narrative bridge between the two films. When the producers approached Clancy Brown about reprising his iconic role, they sent him approximately 20 pages of the script to review, hoping that the actor would be excited about the opportunity to return to the character that had helped establish his reputation as one of cinema's most memorable villains. However, Brown ultimately declined to participate in the sequel, citing concerns about the extensive makeup requirements that would be necessary to recreate the Kurgan's distinctive appearance. The actor revealed that he had developed allergies to theatrical makeup that made it impossible for him to endure the long hours in the makeup chair that would be required to transform him back into the intimidating barbarian warrior. This medical issue forced Brown to turn down what could have been a significant payday and left the screenwriters scrambling to find alternative ways to connect the sequel to the original film's mythology. Fact 13. Lawsuits started before filming ended. The legal troubles surrounding Highlander II began almost immediately after production started in Argentina, with local crew members filing multiple lawsuits against the production company for violations of the country's labor laws before the cameras had even finished rolling. These legal challenges created an additional layer of chaos that compounded the already overwhelming problems caused by the hyperinflation crisis and the dangerous working conditions that had plagued the shoot from its earliest days. The Argentinian staff members who brought these lawsuits were primarily concerned with what they viewed as systematic violations of their rights as workers, including issues related to proper payment schedules, safe working conditions, and adherence to local regulations governing international film productions. The rapid deterioration of the country's economy had made it increasingly difficult for the production to maintain consistent payroll schedules, as the value of currency was fluctuating so dramatically that wages agreed upon one week might be worth significantly less by the time they were actually paid. These legal disputes forced the producers to divert time, money, and attention away from the already troubled filming process in order to deal with court proceedings and negotiations with labor representatives. The lawsuits also created an atmosphere of distrust and tension on set, as local crew members became increasingly suspicious of the foreign production company's ability to honor their contractual obligations during such an unstable economic period. The combination of legal battles and economic chaos created a perfect storm of problems that made it nearly impossible for director Russell Mulcahy and his team to focus on the creative aspects of filmmaking. Instead of concentrating on performances, visual effects, and storytelling, the production became consumed with crisis management as they tried to simultaneously deal with lawsuits, budget overruns, equipment failures, and the daily challenge of simply keeping the cameras rolling while their costs spiraled completely out of control and their legal obligations mounted. Fact 14. Lambert threatened to quit mid-production. Christopher Lambert's frustration with the constantly changing script reached such a breaking point during production that he seriously considered abandoning Highlander II entirely, despite the significant financial and legal consequences that would have resulted from walking away from a major studio film in the middle of shooting. Lambert had initially been enthusiastic about returning to the role of Connor MacLeod, especially with the promise of a larger budget and more sophisticated production values than the original film had enjoyed. However, as the economic crisis in Argentina worsened and the completion bond company began interfering with the creative process, Lambert watched in horror as the script he had agreed to perform was systematically rewritten and altered without his input or approval. The constant changes to dialogue, character motivations, and plot points made it increasingly difficult for the actor to maintain any sense of consistency in his performance, as scenes he had already filmed were being rendered meaningless by new script pages that contradicted everything that had come before. Lambert became particularly disgusted when the Bond company's rewrites began fundamentally altering the mythology and tone of the Highlander universe, transforming what he had expected to be a worthy sequel into what he viewed as a completely different and inferior movie. The actor felt that the changes were not only damaging to the story, but also disrespectful to the fans who had made the original film such an unexpected success. Despite his strong desire to distance himself from what he could see was becoming a disaster, Lambert discovered that his contract contained ironclad provisions that prevented him from leaving the production without facing severe financial penalties and potential lawsuits from the producers. These contractual obligations essentially trapped him in a project that he no longer believed in, forcing him to complete his performance while knowing that the final product would likely damage both his reputation and the legacy of the character he had worked so hard to establish in the first film. Fact 15. 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Highlander II achieved the extremely rare and infamous distinction of earning a 0% rating on the review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes, meaning that not a single professional critic who reviewed the film had anything positive to say about it when it was released in 1991. This perfect score of failure placed the sequel in an exclusive category of movies that are considered so fundamentally flawed that they cannot be recommended under any circumstances, joining the ranks of other notorious disasters that have become legendary for their complete critical rejection. The most memorable and scathing review came from Roger Ebert, the highly respected film critic from the Chicago Sun-Times, who gave the movie just half a star out of 4 and delivered what became one of the most quotable negative reviews in cinema history. Ebert described Highlander II as the most hilariously incomprehensible movie I've seen in many a long day, a movie almost awesome in its badness, capturing both the confusing nature of the plot and the spectacular scale of its failure as entertainment. Ebert went even further in his critique, predicting that the film would become a cautionary tale for future generations of science fiction fans, writing that, wherever science fiction fans gather, in decades and generations to come, This film will be remembered in hushed tones as one of the immortal low points of the genre. The critic also mocked specific elements of the movie, including the visual effects used for the quickening sequences, which he compared to someone standing in a puddle while touching another person who had just stuck their finger in a light socket. The complete critical consensus reflected in the 0% rating was particularly devastating because it represented the unified opinion of professional reviewers across multiple publications and media outlets, making it impossible for the producers to dismiss the negative reception as the work of a few overly harsh critics or biased reviewers who simply didn't understand the film's ambitious scope.